Hi, welcome to the Messerfansen channel. My name is Oskar, and some of you might be wondering, what is Oskar doing on YouTube? Shouldn't he be uploading videos to Instagram? Well, I decided to come up with this YouTube channel for a number of reasons. The most important being that there are several concepts that are just too big or just a little bit too complicated to explain in short videos or pictures like you would do on Instagram. And that would be a really good reason to explore these concepts a bit more thorough in longer videos and upload them on YouTube. So that's one important reason. A second reason is that I've been collecting Lecküchner techniques for 2 years now, and in those 2 years I've done about 1/3 of the manuscript. It's huge, it's ridiculous. But that 1/3 of the manuscript comprises about 150 techniques already, and I have videos of those. So I'm considering putting them together and uploading them as well. And finally, I would really like to start making some more diverse videos, like sparring videos, videos of tournament fights, maybe even videos of workshops and even lectures that I'm giving. As such, here I am, and I will be boring you with stories about Messer fencing, more both practical and theoretical from here on. So if this idea is not too daunting, please follow my channel. Right, let's get into it. What is the purpose of this first video? What I would really like to do is introduce the first series of videos that I would really like to be making. And that's one where we start looking at the Hauptstücke of Johannes Lecküchner in a slightly more bigger detail, and where I would like to answer certain questions that are left unanswered if you simply do the techniques one by one. Apart from that, I would also like to just get started. This first video on my channel is also going to be the first video of that particular series straight away, where I go into some basic concepts of the manuscript to help people who are unfamiliar with it get started and get working with it straight away. So, what is this video series going to be about? It's mostly going to focus on the particular Hauptstücke, and that is because I noticed that doing the techniques one by one is problematic for a number of reasons. The first reason is that the manuscript is just too damn huge. It's taken me 2 years to get 1/3 of this manuscript, and I've been working on it and spending quite a bit of time on it. So just working through the manuscript technique by technique is going to take ages, and a lot of people are going to get discouraged at some point. And it's a real shame if you do the first few Hauptstücke, the first few chapters of the manuscript, and then give up, because there's an entire world of really interesting techniques to be discovered beyond that. Now, the second reason is a bit more fundamental, because I think that just doing all the individual techniques will help you answer just one question, and that question is, how do I do this particular technique? How do I do technique X? How do I do technique Y, etc.? And a far more interesting question that we should strive to answer is, why do I do this technique? What is the purpose of it? In what context should I use it? And that ultimately will help us answer the question, can we use it in modern sparring situations? And if so, against which types of opponents? Could we even use it in a tournament, and would it be effective to help us win tournament fights? As such, I decided to not look at individual techniques, but look at the Hauptstücke. Johannes Lecküchner's manuscript follows the same structure that the longsword manuals that are attributed to the Johannes Lichtenauer and the later glossators. And it follows the same structure. This structure is based around a cryptic verse, which is then explained in more broader and less poetic terms. Thus, we mere mortals can actually read those lines and make sense of them to some extent. And Johannes Lecküchner follows the same structure. The idea is then to follow this structure of these Hauptstücke, these main chapters, and look at them individually. So every chapter, and Lecküchner adds 23 of them, is going to get its own video. And in these videos, I'm going to look at three things. One is really what's in it, because Lecküchner has this annoying tendency to bring together a lot of different traditions, a lot of different ideas, and not all of them are immediately, obviously fitting to this particular Hauptstück. So I'm going over all these different elements in each Hauptstück. Some of them, that might not take much, a lot of time at all. The vier Leger are not that complicated, but for instance, if we look at the Überlaufen, that particular Hauptstück is huge, so that's quite important to make some internal divisions in that. Now, secondly, it's going to really look at how do you do the basic technique. So what are those vier Leger about? What should we keep, what should we focus on when trying to do these? And finally, I'm going to look at what is the function of this technique? Why do we even do this? And that might help us answer the question, could we use it in modern sparring situations? If yes, against what types of opponents, and would it be useful in tournament fights? So, to get started straight away, I would like to introduce some basic concepts behind the Lecküchner manuscript. And it's going to be mainly practical. You can say a lot about the theory behind the manuscript, but here are just some really basic practical pointers if you want to get started with the manuscript. And one of them is that the manuscript itself is just mostly a compilation. It features techniques from the Lichtenauer tradition, as I explained before, but it also takes stuff from other traditions. I mean, and that's not strange. Johannes Lecküchner lived in the general area around the city of Nuremberg in southern Germany, and you find a lot of other traditions and even other masters who could potentially have influenced Lecküchner's work. It's really difficult to say whether that really happened, but we see a lot of techniques that are also, for instance, in Codex Wallenstein and the Dürer-Fechtbuch at the same time, but also some stuff that Talhofer would probably really have liked, and as such, there is quite a bit of overlap. So Lecküchner does not follow the Lichtenauer to the letter. It's not just longsword with a Messe. And that brings me to my next point. Not every technique will work all the time. There are a lot of different contexts that are described, and that's not strange because this manuscript really is huge. I've guesstimated that there's anything between 600 and 800 techniques in there. So you will find a lot of different situations that are being addressed. For instance, there is the situation of self-defense, and there are not many techniques that conform to this, but there's, for instance, the Hauptstück, which tells you strike his hands if you want to end a fight quickly, which is not weird because it's low risk. You do not have to go for deep targets. It's a very shallow target, and the trauma is going to be really high, so hitting someone on the hands properly will put them out of the fight. There's a few techniques that are Notstücke, so emergency pieces, and this is the kind of thing that could be used in self-defense situations. Now, there's also, for instance, the Fechtschule. Fechtschule is completely different. This is more like pro wrestling, where you whip out the proverbial folding chairs and do really ridiculous big techniques. It gives you some techniques to use when other people are making really big strokes that you might see in Dusak fencing, and gives you really effective counters against that. And finally, there is a context that I would hesitate to call dueling, but it does have a formal fight between two opponents, and there are some spoken or unspoken rules to that fight. One is there is supposed to be a really large amount of control, because a lot of what is being shown is bind work where the blades of the messers remain in contact. That means that you will be really able to feel what the opponent is doing and act accordingly. accordingly without getting hit yourself. And speed and aggression are not necessarily as important in a fight like that. Another thing about these fights is that you see that the amount of trauma is very much measured. You often get the chance of letting your opponent go scot-free, giving him a small scar to remember you by, or killing him outright. So that is also an interesting thing to note. And not all of these techniques translate as well to modern sparring or self-defense situations, and I'll be going into that in these videos as well. Now, having said that, I would really like to go on with a slightly more practical demonstration of some of the basic techniques that play a large part in this manuscript. Some basic strikes, some basic defenses, and finally some theoretical concepts that are quite important before we get started. And I'll show these right now. The first thing Lecküchner tells us to do is to not parry too much, because if we parry too much, if we only parry, we'll pretty much always be defeated. Well, that's a truism if ever I saw one. But another lesson we can learn from this is that you should attack the opponent directly and not chase after the blade or do other things. And one of the best ways I've found of doing this is start making your strikes as long as you can. So as you can see, I'm striking here with an almost stretched arm, and this gives me a lot of reach, but it also tends to give me bites that are really easy to thrust from, and a lot of techniques in Lecküchner end with a thrust. As such, striking your Obenhau strike from above long, as you can see it here, it can usually be quite a good idea. The same thing goes for strikes from below, the so-called Unterhau, and this strike from below is also in Lecküchner best done with a stretched arm, with the short edge, because striking with a long edge will shorten it. The short edge, ironically enough, will allow you to get into similar situations where you have to point on your opponent and can, for instance, do a changing through, which we will see in one of these later chapters. Final thing I would like to talk about is the concept of the 5 words: vor, nach, indes, schwach und sterk. Or rather in English, before, after, simultaneously, difficult to translate, weak and strong. And we're going to show these concepts here. Right, in this first particular case, Kami begins her attack before I start moving, and that means that since I start moving later, I am after. I start moving after, and that means that she comes before. In the second situation is reversed. I start moving first, that's why I come before, and Kami comes after. So she is nach. And before and after, vor and nach, can therefore denote both timing and initiative, because the person who starts the movement first will be the one attacking the opponent. The one who starts the movement after will have to respond to it. So it's both timing and initiative. Now, then we get to the word indes. Indes, which you could translate as simultaneously, is a very interesting moment, a very magical moment even, because this is a moment where we are both doing something. We get to make a decision on how to turn the fight in our favor, and sometimes the initiative might change. And you can see that here. I'm being attacked with a thrust, and I counter that with a thrust of my own. We're both acting at the same time, but in the end you will see that I have taken the initiative, and I am therefore for, and Kami should start to respond to that again. But it doesn't have to always be so that indes means that the initiative changes, because in this particular example here you can see that Kami is attacking me with the same thrust. I'm thrusting again against it, and during this moment of indes, she however winds to the other side and manages to still thrust me. we had a similar index moment, but the result is that she is still for and I'm still nach, as before, so no changing of initiative. And it's also quite interesting to note that we can also see weak and strong in this example, because weak denotes the upper half of the blade according to Lecküchner, and strong denotes the lower half of the blade. And with winding actions like this, there are tons of them throughout the manuscript. Winding actions like this usually revolve around bringing the strong of your weapon to the weak of your opponent. My initial counter works by bringing the strong of my messer to the weak of Kami's messer, and that allows me to thrust at her. However, her counter to that action also consists of bringing her strong again to my weak, and therefore being able to thrust me. And this makes that you have 5 words that very much bring together the entire art. These 5 words will tell you at what time you should do which technique, and I will be referring to them quite a lot. Having said that, I've covered quite a lot of the basic things in the introduction to Lecküchner's Vechtbuch. The next things will be going into actual chapters, so I'll be starting with the first video on the Zornhau and going into what's written there. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and keep an eye out for future videos. Thank you very much.